that work, and we don't mean work here sort of metaphorically, we mean like work, you know, going to work, taking the time to assess, analyze, whatever it is you do for work. Work produces value, right? And this is correct. C-O-R. Right? This is correct. So we want to reject the idea, and actually let's use a red marker. We want to reject the idea that disposition leads to value. Nietzsche wants to wholeheartedly reject that idea. Do I have any? I don't have any green. Bastards. I don't have any green. I wanted to use a green. Yeah, here we go. Nietzsche wants to reject the idea that disposition leads to value, and he wants to affirm the idea that work leads to value. And this is the distinction, right? He would say, he just said, that this is the immoralist, right? This is the moralist point of view, and this is the Christian. Right? He does not regard the acts, the work of Christianity as being true work. He regards the work, quote unquote, of Christianity as maintaining a disposition. And we saw this earlier in the previous series where he talked about the separation between symbolism and history, insofar as the symbols have now been infused within people, right? Have been infused within artifacts. So what ends up happening is that there's merely a disposition of some, you know, preeminence or whatever it is that the religious community is attempting to attain, and that really is an act of inactivity, and that's what's being valued. So you can see that they're polemic, they're completely polemic ideas, right? The distinction between work and inactivity couldn't be further ends of poles, and the attribution of value in each system couldn't be further separated. Okay, so that is, value is attributed through work, and this is an active attribution of value. So we look at value here as an active, this is my phrase, what I'm calling an active attribution of value, and this is an inactive attribution So we have the separation between an active, just so that it's clear, an active attribution of value and an inactive attribution of value. So the moralists, according to Nietzsche, have and participate in an active attribution of value, whereas the Christian point of view is an inactive attribution of value. So how exactly does this unfold? And I've and I should provide, have I provided a link here? Yeah, I provided a link at the top of page 33. Just click the link to free writing. I have a whole 7 or 8 part series on the notion of free writing, and I introduced this image not with respect to the immoralist and Christian attributions of value, but I discuss in detail sort of the relationship between effort, work, the products of your labor, value, and all that in a more systematic account on just free writing. The lecture's maybe an hour or 2 hours long. Watch that as a supplement. It's a very important lecture, I think. I think it's a very important lecture. What we do is we're going to apply that concept now to a socio-cultural analysis of the attribution of value between an immoralist and a Christian. And we don't mean any specific Christian per se, between the immoralist stance and the Christian stance, according to Nietzsche, that is, okay? So I'm going to erase this. And now we can really have a sense of the separation. I never labeled the diagram, but we'll call it C-H-R-I-S-T-I, Christian. Alright, so the Christian and immoralist problem of free... Right, the problem of free writing. Okay, the idea, without recapping free writing, because you watch that on your own, and I really encourage you to watch the series, right? The problem with free writing is an enclosed system. Specifically, the system we're going to be looking at in this example is a socio-cultural. A cultural system, a social system, you can even do political system, and sort of how that closed system operates. For more information on open-closed systems, you can watch the video series. So we have here the immoralist. And we have over here a representative of Christianity. So we have Christianity on one end, the immoralist on the other. What we've seen just now, as I said earlier, is we need to ask ourselves about value. Right? And we'll label this 1, and we'll label this 2. So the question is, what is the conception of value for the immoralist? And we saw just now that the conception of value for the immoralist is an active attribution of work, right? It's an active process. All right, so an active attribution of value So, number one, the immoralist has an active attribution of value, and we saw how that worked, right? The conception of active attribution comes as a consequence of work as opposed to disposition. Work leads to products, the act of producing, and that act of producing is valuable, as opposed to the Christian conception, or the Christian point of view, which is disposition-based. That disposition leads to inactivity, and that inactivity is value. So what we do now is we recognize that rather than having an active attribution of value as the immoralist does, the Christian is going to have an inactive attribution. And, you know, like as I said, all of the lectures won't be this deep, but this particular lecture requires a little bit more sort of assessment. Okay, so now let's create the system. So basically, we're going to construct sort of, this is my sort of visual interpretation, my visual depiction of how this system unfolds. So, in the notes, it's actually, if you're looking at the PDF, there's color in the image. My image doesn't have color because I don't use a color printer, but I am going to reproduce it with color. One more thing. We have value here. We have the idea of value. Right? Okay. And then the system goes like this. Okay. Okay, so you can see my system is essentially closed, right? Just visually closed. So my system is closed. I have, if you were to think of sort of a maze, how do we get from one point to another? It's sort of like this. Okay, so the immoralist, what the immoralist does through active contribution, the immoralist creates work. And work becomes valuable. Right? And the question is, just again, how is it that we arrived at value for the immoralist? We arrived at value for the immoralist by work. Right? We arrived at value by work. Specifically, again, the distinction between work and disposition. Now, that value cycles through the system, and obviously it loops, right? So that there's a flow. What does that mean in sort of a real sense? How can I make sense of this idea of value within the system? Think of it like this. I create these video series. I don't just create these you might not know this, but it's true. I don't just create these video series entirely because it's some act of altruism. You know, I'm not an altruist. I'm maybe a moderate altruist, but I'm more